Greetings Zimbabwe and welcome to Zimbabwe Daily. My name is Yvonne Muchaka and I'm excited to bring you our episode where we are looking at persons of interest, especially looking at post-independent Zimbabwe. And today I'm joined by one man who continues to have a presence in our country. If you know, you know him. If you don't, you're going to start knowing him today. Mr. Mangoma, welcome.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you for allowing us to come into your space and have this conversation.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, what have you been up to?
Well, essentially I've retired from what I call elective politics.
Right.
So I no longer participate and go out to ask people to vote for me. I am now more into nation building issues to make sure that we actually have a country that realizes its potential. Because you always hear everybody say Zimbabwe has great potential, but very few of us have concentrated on making sure that that potential is actually realized.
Right.
Yes.
When you say potential, what do you mean?
I mean a country that can become a leader in not only in Africa but in the world. We are endowed with tremendous human skills and capacity. We are endowed with tremendous natural resources, and all these put together could actually take Zimbabwe to an extremely developed country as opposed to the majority of our people wallowing in poverty as it is now.
Right. A lot of people don't actually know you, Honorable Mangoma. Maybe you can help AMA 2000s to know who you are.
Well, I am basically a country boy. I grew up in the rural areas.
Right.
I went to school in the rural areas until I was going to boarding school in secondary school.
Right.
Where I went to 3 secondary schools, starting from St. Benedict's in Macheke, then Nyamuzue, in Mutoko, and did my A-levels at Goromonzi.
Oh, wow.
And then I went to the University of Zimbabwe, where I studied for a Bachelor of Accountancy degree.
Right.
Qualified as a chartered accountant under Deloitte, and became a practicing chartered accountant, a businessman. And now for most people who look at me, can't even see the rural background in me.
Right.
Yes.
And with that particular background, through a couple of years later, we see you in Parliament, and you're one of the few top leaders in the then movement for democratic change who was a member of Parliament in a rural constituency. Tell us about your political journey, how it started and how you ended up being an MP in Makone.
Well, first, when it started, my father was actually one of the nationalists. He was detained by Ian Smith for long periods, to an extent where I actually, and my brothers and sisters, we were put through school by family members, my older brother in particular, but also through charity.
Right.
Christian Care paid a lot of my fees, secondary school fees, and my brother's school fees. So because of that, I saw how the family being political, I really, when I finished school,
University
and trained, I wanted just to be in business,
Okay.
and not to be necessarily in politics. So I never wanted to be a politician, and I never called myself a politician.
Right.
But my father wanted me to be involved in politics.
Can you tell us who your father was?
My father was Solomon Steers Mangoma.
I see, okay.
And
those are some of the heroes that we need to also
exactly.
celebrate, right?
And that's why, for me, he played a key role in making sure that nationalism, all fighting against the colonial oppression, was really at the grassroots level.
Right.
And for that, I really hold him in great stead. He was doing it not just for us as the family, but for the country.
Right.
Selflessly. So when I started, I wanted to be a little bit selfish, although I was really working a lot more for the community.
Right.
I was involved in community affairs and other things, both at the professional level and at the social level, to an extent where it became almost natural to go onto the political stage.
Right.
Yeah. I then when he wanted me to be, when my father wanted me to go into politics, if I had joined at that point, I would have been a ZANU-PF person. But I really didn't like the way things were being done, so I declined. And he then passed on in 1990. So it wasn't some 9 years later, after his death, that my interest in politics
What a change.
was aroused.
You're a businessman, you're thinking, okay, now I'm a chartered accountant, I can just focus on my profession, and then something happened. What
That's
happened?
correct. Well, I think the way the country was going, it was very wrong at that point.
Right.
I suppose with the eyes that could see, because normally it's very difficult for people to see about tomorrow. They feel the now. But I could see that the trajectory was very wrong and started agitating a few years before, but really more like an agitating for things to be corrected.
Right.
Without taking a stance to now formally oppose the government then.
Right, yeah.
Which then happened in 1999. That you said, no, we cannot continue on this trajectory, we have to change. And instead of looking for other people to make things change, I said I had to be the one that has got to take a stand and do it properly.
Typical, train up a child in the way you should go, and when they are older, they will not depart. There you are now in politics.
Yeah.
Tell us about when the party was now formed and elections were looming. What was the first campaign that you got into?
Actually, my very first campaign was at our local, at home.
Right.
Gathered people at the school where I had been, where I did my primary education. That's where I actually had my first political meeting, so to speak,
Right.
and declared that I really wanted to be involved, and the government was doing things wrong,
Right.
and that things needed to change. Unfortunately, that first attempt didn't. That was in 2000. We lost.
Right. You were campaigning as what, MP or councillor?
MP.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next election we were involved in was in 2002, when it was now the presidential.
The presidential campaign.
And I was now also campaigning mostly in the rural areas, my home area,
Right.
and my Manicaland as the region where I came from. Yes.
Wow, okay. And how was that in terms of the safety, your safety as an individual and members of your party then?
Well, you know, it was a very difficult time, but I always, because I was a local person, everybody who was a war veteran were my age group,
I see.
or a little younger or a little older. And therefore I had known most of them, grown up with some of them.
Right.
And I really was not scared of any of them. And I didn't feel that I should not do it because of my own personal safety. Okay. Obviously, I would take some nice precautionary measures, particularly because the one person who I was contesting against was Didmas Mutasa, who was known as the most cruel person then in ZANU-PF, and therefore it certainly was not a safe constituency. But I always like people in the rural areas because, you know, when they tell you you are together, you are together.
They mean it.
They mean it.
Right.
Yeah. And they often would not show it. They are clever about their security, and this up to today, the security situation in the rural areas is not very good at all.
Right.
And therefore, I always applaud the few who want to show it that they are opposing what is happening, because they are very courageous.
Right.
And often some of them will lose their houses and personal belongings, and also a lot of the rights to being given whatever the government
food aid, inputs, etc.
Inputs, yeah, you know, food government programs.
Yes,
they are excluded. So it actually takes a lot of courage to take that stance. And even as you go up in seniority, it takes a lot of courage because they go for you at a personal level. So if you are not strong, you will falter. Yeah.
Right, and then you became a member of parliament.
Yes.
It was in which year? The 2008 one?
The 2008 one.
Right.
Yes.
Tell us about that season.
Well, that season, I think there was a momentum shift. People were tired of ZANU-PF. And I remember a lot of people would campaign against ZANU-PF. And I know some people who campaigned for me. I never met them.
Right.
But they were there wanting change. And I also did not even believe that the people who were campaigning for me at that time knew whether I had the capacity or not.
Right.
But perhaps they simply looked at the courage that, you know, to put yourself up for an election in those circumstances required a lot of courage. Yeah.
And was your constituency affected by the political violence that rocked the nation around that time?
It was affected, but you see what happened in 2008, which did not happen before, was that these constituencies were further split. We were split from 120 constituencies to 290. So what that did was to separate me and Didmas Mutasa from that constituency.
Okay.
Didmas Mutasa took the next, the adjoining constituency, which was the Headlands constituency. And the effect of violence was much more pronounced in
the Headlands area,
in the Headlands area than in Makoni North then.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, roll it down another year down the line, and the MDC made up part of the inclusive government of 2009, and you were made the Minister of Economic Planning and Investment Promotion.
Yes.
How was the experience in government, and what did you learn from that?
Well, first I can say I learned just how government carries on its operations.
Right.
I also learned that the lack of skills in government and the outcomes that we then get because of that. Because when we were in the economic planning, a lot of people expected an economic forecasting rather than actually saying the economy should take this shape and this trajectory.
Okay.
And make, not only plan, but make that plan work. So that is really what I was bringing into the government, to make sure that it's not just forecasting 1 year after another, but really to say, how can we marshal all the resources in government to be able to improve the way our people really live.
Right.
I was the first one to bring in that we wanted to achieve double-digit growth, for which a lot of the other ministers and so on said I was daydreaming.
Right.
Until, you know, after 1 year, they began to see that actually marshalling all these things, it is actually possible to make a government tick and tick very well for the citizens.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. And then came in an issue that I really want us to go deep into, the issue of the Chisumbanje sugar plantation and mandatory blending that then took place during your time as the minister then. And I remember you actually getting arrested and because you were opposed to mandatory blending. Could you like take us into that moment? I know it's been a long time and you probably would just want to brush it aside, but something happened at that particular time, because I remember as the MDC or the MDC side of government, you were totally against the whole happenings in Chisumbanje and what was happening there with Billy Rottenberg and stuff. So I would want you to like take us into that.
Well, first, I was transferred from Economic Planning Ministry to the Ministry of Energy.
Energy, yes.
And when I was there, the issue of the sugar or ethanol blending, obviously was one of the main focuses. But when we come to Chisumbanje area, there were a few issues that were problematic. The first was that the land, the villagers were being forced off their land, and that land being given to a private business, so to speak. And that did not sit well with me.
Right.
First, because not only was that, it was now a reversal of the thinking that economics or at a local level for the individuals was now being turned around and saying, here is a white person. Not that it was a question of white. We are now taking land from black people and giving it to a white person. That did not sit with me well at all.
Okay.
Two, this land was being taken from these individuals without compensation. So there was no compensation at all.
Right.
And it's unlike, you know, having grown up in a rural area, I know you have got to stitch your life almost year by year.
Right.
So when your livelihood is taken away from you, you become destitute straight away.
Right.
And that I could not take. So take away the nature of the project. If it had been done in a way that there was compensation for the villagers, it would have been fine. And if indeed it then would benefit the local community as well, it would be fine. But it didn't have this.
Right.
The second thing was that the investment levels were extremely exaggerated. And having been a trained chartered accountant. I can see $1 million or $1 billion and I understand what money can do and can't do.
Right.
Which many people will not understand. And therefore, I was very clear to see that the money that was being said to be the investment level was not there.
Right.
And therefore, it was some kind of a fraud. And therefore, I would not support
Such a thing.
And thirdly, I think it was the way people were there. It then became very politicized, as opposed to really making it economic and making it make sense
right.
to everybody around it. So those
fundamentals are just not there.
So when it came to blending and mandatory blending in particular, I was then against the issue of mandatory blending of a private individuals, of private business,
right,
being given a privilege by government at no cost or benefit to government whatsoever.
Right.
That did not, and therefore, during my tenure, there was no mandatory blending.
Right.
That legislation did not go through. The one that we pushed through is only if there is a significant public ownership in the production of the ethanol,
right,
would it become mandatory, because it's now government benefiting from it. You could not have a private individual profit from government policy,
right,
directives,
yeah,
without the government itself benefiting
from
anything.
the whole process, yeah.
Never mind the technical issues of how it would affect the quality of the engines of some of the vehicles that were involved.
Right.
Yeah.
It's actually quite interesting that you speak that way, because as we are talking right now, it throws me right into the Pomona issue that's happening in Harare. You know, like,
yes,
the whole investment is actually taking away from the city rather than benefiting the city. And it seems like there's a trend being set on poor policies and poor, engagement with investors.
Well, this is the point that we must be able, and certainly government must be in a position to say, when we are issuing public policy, right, the public must benefit from it.
Right.
Public policy in that instance should not be done to promote a private business. A business must look at the total environment in the country and say, yes, I can invest in that area, I can invest in that area, I can invest in that area, without them piggybacking on the back of government for their own private benefit.
Yeah. And thank you very much for that. Now,
you can see I've avoided the Pomona issue because it's fairly topical, but as a citizen, I certainly think that it has been done the wrong way.
And I want to fast forward again to 2013 election and 2014 and the subsequent drawing away that you and some leaders within the MDC did at that time. Could you tell us what was going on in that season?
Well, some of the things I can't tell you, but what I can share with you is that the 2013 election was stolen from the MDC.
Right.
And that having been stolen away, the issue was, what was the way forward? I think a few of us had a difference in view as to where it should be taken forward.
Right.
And we discussed this to a point where you could see that we could see the trajectory taking much longer if we continued on the same path. Right. Than actually change from that path, because when some of our people we went into government, there was a certain amount of contamination with that which we were fighting.
Right.
So we needed to be able to say, guys, let's resit, let's look and say, what is it that we are fighting? Because when you are in these narratives, you begin to look and say, people are saying we are fighting ZANU-PF, as opposed to saying we are fighting the bad things that ZANU-PF is doing.
Right.
Which means whoever does the same things that ZANU-PF is doing, we will continue to fight that person.
Right.
And I think that is where the difference was. That there were certain things that we really said, these things for nation building, for the country to go forward, we should be taken away.
Right.
It's not a question of changing personalities. It's a question of changing the systems.
Right.
Others wanted the change of personalities. Some of us wanted a change of the systems.
Right.
So that became the fundamental area of departure.
Right.
Yes.
Awesome. Interesting. Change of personality versus change of system. And I want you to, you have retired from politics, but when you look at it from a different perspective, not as a participant as such, but more of a cursory view in terms of our political environment, there's a lot of toxicity and just polarity. It's so polarized. It's either you are this one or you are not. Full stop. It's black and white. If we're talking of nation building that we're talking about, should we look at our national politics in black and white shades?
Well, this is what has brought us that we look at it. One, we personalize it, and two, we slot people into categories which they are or may not be.
Right.
And it's driven by lots of ignorance rather than actually an education where someone has taken time to look at, even listen to whatever is there. And so those who benefit from the polarization obviously want it to continue.
Pushing it.
But as long as that polarization carries on, this country will not develop.
Right.
Because whatever is done by the person you don't like, even if it is good, you label it being bad.
Right.
Whereas when you are nation building, you want to be able to say, what are the good points coming from this person? Can we mix them with the other good things from that person? And then together we move forward.
Right.
And I think that is what is actually required. If you look at ZANU-PF, for instance, it's doing very little good at this time.
Right.
But when you look back and you say the education policy that was followed in the early years of independence was probably the best you could have in the world, certainly in Africa. And that, even ZANU-PF has abandoned that. We must aim to go back to that kind of inclusive education, where education is a right and every child can go to school. Not now when only those children of the elite and of those that can pay school fees go to, because what we are doing is we are creating a major problem for the future of this country. So I think that when we look at what has been done well and say this is all right, and what has been done badly and say this is bad.
Right.
And so when the next government comes in, it improves
on the good
things.
Right. And discard the bad.
The bad things.
Clearly. Okay, so this is the conversation that we're having right here on Zimbabwe Daily, and we're talking to Honorable Elton Mangoma. He is retired in politics, and yet he continues to push for nation building. As you tune in, do send in your comments, your contribution, and also what you think. If you've got questions also, feel free to send them, and we'll definitely ask our honorable here to also just highlight some of these issues. This is Persons of Interest, a program that we bring you on the platform so that we get to meet some of these people whose voices may not be heard as much as we would want them, but they carry a certain level of wisdom that we need as a nation. Now, Honorable Mangoma, as we conclude this conversation, maybe I would want you to just speak to a young person of today who has grown up in a system that we may all agree that has not been very helpful to their development or to their cause or to just the general outlook of what we are trying to build as a nation. What would you say to a young Zimbabwean?
Right. The first thing is to say to young Zimbabweans, get yourself equipped with a certain level of skill. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what it is. Have a skill. Be competent at something. Walking in the street is not competency.
Right.
You should be able to rear chickens competently, plow the fields, grow tobacco competently. Do something. Be competent, like with photography, with journalism. Do something.
Right.
So that you have that competency where you can say, guess what? I can put together this as a mechanic. I can do that. And even in these harsh times, in fact, particularly in these harsh times, it is important for the young people to equip themselves with a skill.
Right.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is to be able to do yourself a favor by finding mentors. Look for people who can assist you grow. The third is to inculcate yourself into certain values.
Right.
The critical values is one of integrity, honesty.
Yeah.
If we just, and that, the harder the situation, the better it is actually to be trusted by someone. Because even as you make a meal, someone must trust you enough to eat it,
right,
that you have not done something with it. So the issue of honesty and trust is at the core of nation building. Then the third is to desist from being a pawn, particularly for political violence. Learn the politics. Be assured that clearly you might not have the room to manipulate, to maneuver, to become a player yourself, but many of them start by assisting a cause.
Right.
Assist a cause, learn as much as you can from that person, do it as diligently as possible, and register to vote, and go and vote. As a citizen, you must know that the future is in your hands. And once you become 18 years and above, you are as important from a voting point of view as a 60, a 70, or an 80-year-old. So that becomes important for our youths to be able to know that they must take interest in their communities. Make sure that the community is well, because just to cry that the community is poor without actually devoting even some of your time, unpaid time.
Right.
And people must be able to learn that we build a country, we build a community through putting our unpaid time and skill to develop it. And you don't live in an island, and therefore you must be able to embrace your community and try to make it as better as you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Your biggest regrets, Honorable?
You know, I actually don't have regrets, because whatever I do, I actually think about it. So I have had the decisions that I have taken have been out of careful consideration, so to the point that I actually don't regret. But if I regret as a country, is that we let the opportunities that this country has got, the potential, slide away day after day after day. That, to me, is, you can say, a collective failure to make Zimbabwe a better country.
Right.
I always regret that.
And
but it's a collective failure.
And your biggest hope?
My biggest hope is that we will be able to get ZANU-PF off first, to a point where we will be able to begin as a nation to look at issues and the critical things in a more objective way.
Right. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. I'm richer just having these few minutes with you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you, Zimbabwe, for tuning in. I hope you picked one or two. I did. And I hope we'll be able to rebuild Zimbabwe so that it is one of the best countries in the world. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's bye-bye for now.